standing at the altar in her sister's veil. The man lifting it does not know her name. He thinks he does. 11 days of saying it, and 11 days of answering because she is a soldier, and soldiers hold the line regardless of what holding costs them. Rooms worse than this. Blood on her boots. The long silence before impact. Not once has she shaken. She is shaking now. Not from fear of him. From the knowledge that when this veil clears her face, and he finally looks, what he will find is not a woman who is someone else's. It is her. And she is not who he thinks she is. There are women who find stories like this one at midnight, alone, not because they want entertainment, but because something in them is tired of not being understood. If you are one of them, subscribe. This channel was built for you specifically. The dinner had been running for 2 hours, and perhaps 40 words had come from her. Not unusual for a soldier at a formal table. The order had its ceremonies, its protocols of precedence, and quiet. What the court of Blaviken did not know was that she was a soldier. They believed she was Nadia. And Nadia, by every account gathered across 11 days, had never once allowed a silence to sit when filling it was an option. Nadia filled everything. Rooms. Conversations. The air between other people's thoughts. Ilda held ground. A different skill entirely. The Blaviken estate occupied Lincoln's southern edge, where the city thinned into flat, open country, and the dining hall ran the length of the estate's oldest wing, low-ceilinged, lit by candlelight that did not quite reach the corners. The smell of it had steadied her on the first entry. Old stone, melted wax, something herbed from the kitchen, close enough to the compound's refectory that it could be filed under useful and held close. That filing held now. You were present at the Aldenmere gathering in April. The woman to her left had not stopped watching since the soup course. Corvina, senior among the court's older guard, placed near enough the head of the table to signal standing without occupying it. Her voice carried, without effort, the way voices did that had never needed to try. You had a great deal to say about the water access dispute. I wondered if your position had changed. The whole table heard it. Not because Corvina had raised her voice. Because the table had been waiting for a reason to look. The fork went down. Nadia had been at the Aldenmere gathering. Nadia had apparently said things there. What those things were, the briefing had not covered. 30 minutes in a corridor while Nadia pressed cloth to her forearm and spoke in the rapid, certain way she spoke about everything already decided. The face would do most of the work. Keep quiet. Let them fill in the rest. The face was not doing enough work right now. My position on water access has always been a practical one. A pause, just long enough. The situation in April was in flux. Committing to a line before the assessment is complete does no one any good. The glass lifted, unhurried. I'm sure you understand. Corvina held the look for a moment with weight in it, then a slight inclination of the head, accepting the answer without warmth, and the table exhaled without anyone visibly breathing. 4 words with a position stated in none of them. No lie that could be checked. Under the table, the thumbnail had been pressing into her palm for 10 minutes, without registration until now. She had not asked for this. 3 weeks ago, though it felt like 3 lifetimes, the day had been ordinary. Training ground at dawn. The routine of the order's compound on Lincoln's western edge, the bells marking hours, the work that named her and required nothing else. Then the gate had opened, and Nadia had come through it in the rain with blood on her sleeve and one sentence ready. There is no one else. There never was. Nadia had taken her face in both cold hands the way she had done since they were girls, certain and unapologetic about it, and spoken the words that always ended the same way. For crown. For kingdom. For family. What could be said to that but yes? The way to tell Nadia no had never been found. A few weeks, Nadia had promised. We have the same face. Their faces were the same. Nothing else was. You're quieter than I remember. 3 seats to her right, Farouk had been a managed absence for the whole of the dinner's first hour. A careful blind spot maintained through attention to every other quadrant of the room. Sustainable no longer. He was watching her with an expression that could not be classified. Not suspicion. Not warmth exactly. Something positioned between the two, or outside both. The quality of attention she recognized only because it was the same thing she did when she was trying to understand something without letting it know she was trying. The road from Velan was long, she said. You've made that crossing before. Yes. Eye contact held. A road can feel longer on the return. He considered that. The glass in his hand turned once, slowly. Perhaps. The plate returned her attention. Around her the court talked, names and histories and small political observations she stored the way she stored terrain. Useful later, useless now. No need to do anything but receive them. 3 seats past Farouk. The warden had not touched his glass since the first course. Placed on her second day, the way every potential threat got placed, before he placed her, or close to it. Old for a warden. The kind of old that meant surviving by being very good at exactly one thing for a very long time. The ceremony had not held his interest. The food had not. The formal arrangement of the court around him had not. Her face held his interest. It was holding it now. Looking back would cost more than the silence was worth. The corridor outside the borrowed rooms smelled of cedar and something faintly floral still unnamed. Nadia's scent, pressed into the curtains and the wardrobe lining over weeks of occupation. The door closed. The lamp found her hand in the dark. The room was full of her sister. Nadia's clothes in the wardrobe, arranged with the specific precision she brought to everything she treated as a tool. Letters on the desk, sealed and waiting. A traveling bag on the chair by the window, its buckle bent where something heavy had been dropped on it. That buckle held attention longer than it should have. Then came the window. Lincoln's southern edge lay dark beyond the estate wall. The city's light smeared low against the cloud to the north, the land between running flat and still. 15 years in the order. Rooms read, exits mapped, the exact weight of a silence before it broke. Situations worse than this walked into and walked back out of. The glass pressed cold against her forehead. Down the corridor, footsteps came and slowed. Even. A man with no reason to hurry. They stopped outside a door 3 rooms down. A pause. Good night, Nadia. Low. Almost too quiet to carry. Not her name. The words pressed against the inside of her chest and did not move, and the window held her long after the corridor went quiet, the dark outside registering nothing, the city going about its business without her. The 12th morning came, and she was still there. Counting had stopped in the first week. Marking days like a soldier in a siege, tracking water rations had made it worse, so the counting changed. What had been learned? What had not yet been exposed? What could still be afforded to lose? The blood tasting had been on the formal calendar since the second day. Listed among the estate's scheduled events in the same measured hand that recorded council sessions and evening meals. Noted with the particular stillness she brought to things that could not yet be planned around. Nadia had said almost nothing about it. It's ceremonial, she had said at the gate with a cloth to her forearm. You'll know what to do when it comes. What had been learned through careful listening across 2 weeks was this. The blood tasting was how Blaviken sealed a betrothal. Not the formal contract. Not the cathedral ceremony later. This moment. The betrothed offered her wrist to the king before the assembled court. The king drank, the court bore witness, and the bond was considered real and the truce binding. Old. Not optional. No one had briefed her on the sequence of gestures, the precise words, the exact way the thing was meant to unfold, because Nadia had known, and knowing had always been the same as telling as far as Nadia was concerned. Petra, Nadia's handmaid, had offered twice to help her dress. Both times declined. Petra was young enough not to press. The hall was smaller than the dining room, candles set low in iron holders along the walls, their light pooling on the stone floor without reaching the ceiling. The assembled court stood rather than sat, which made the space feel larger than it was. At the center, Farouk waited. Something dark, no insignia. Watching the door when she entered. finding her without searching. The room across which she walked was quiet in a different way than the estate's other quiet rooms. Not performed quiet, not breath held and pretended about. This was the silence of something old, the kind that settles into the walls of a room over centuries and does not leave. Before him, 2 feet of space remained between them. This much was certain. Walk to him. Everything after that would have to be found in the moment. 12 prepared answers sat ready for a conversation she intended not to have with him afterward. Nothing had been prepared for this. His face, looked at for half a second, offered no instruction. One choice remained. Stillness was the first requirement, learned before the order taught anything else worth keeping. A moving target communicates uncertainty. A still one communicates intention. The wrist went out, not tentatively, not as a question. The way anything that mattered got handed over, directly, with the full weight of a decision behind it. Something passed through his expression. Not surprise. Closer to recognition, as though she had answered a question he had not yet found words for. Both hands took her wrist. His grip was careful, deliberate. The coolness of it registered before anything else, a steadiness against her pulse, and then he bent his head, and her gaze fixed on a candle 3 feet ahead and held there. The room was so quiet that the flame could be heard. That small persistent sound of combustion, focused on, and nothing else tracked. When he raised his head, his eyes met hers and held there. 1 beat past the ritual's end.
2.
The court was watching. Looking away would cost more than holding the gaze would, and that calculation had been made before crossing the threshold. He released her wrist. The court began to breathe again. At the center of it, her pulse settled back towards something recognizable. The stillness lasted only a moment. It was taken anyway. Afterward, in the smaller room off the hall, the window offered the estate grounds beyond the glass and a glass of something not being drunk. Staying had not been the intention. The staying happened. "You surprised me," Farouk said. His voice behind her, not his eyes. The estate grounds held her gaze, and the question of how she surprised him did not get asked. He was quiet, not the uncomfortable quiet of someone waiting to be answered. A genuinely settled quiet. "Most people move through the tasting like it's an obstacle," he said. "You move through it like it was the whole point." No answer existed that would not cost something, so the window got the silence and he accepted it, with the patience of a man who had learned that waiting was its own kind of information. He left a few minutes later. The room thinned enough that staying would itself become noticeable, and then movement happened. The corridor before the residential wing's turn was open and clear and covered in 4 seconds. Aldous was at the corridor's end, not in her path, off to the side, in the arrangement of a man who had arrived somewhere ahead of her and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Not moving toward her, hands loose at his sides, watching with an expression that held no hostility in it and no warmth either. 4 feet of clearance, close enough to read the stillness in him, the quality of a man who does not fidget because nothing about the current moment requires it. No word from him, no word returned. The coroner came and went. Back in Nadia's rooms, water filled the basin. Both hands went into it and stayed until they stopped registering the cold. The ceremony had gone right. The only thing available had been done, and it had been, by any useful measure, enough. That was not the problem. Aldous had been in that smaller room for the full length of the conversation with Farouk. Placed in the first survey of the space, 3 feet behind Farouk's left shoulder. Noted on the way in and the way out. He had not watched the blood tasting. He had not watched the court's response to it. He had not looked at the ceremony at all. The understanding arrived standing at the basin with the water going cold. He had watched her. Not the way someone watches a stranger. The way someone watches a problem they have already named, filed, and simply not yet decided what to do with. 15 years in the order had made one thing clear about luck. It was a finite resource. Soldiers knew this the way they knew most things that had not yet arrived, clearly and at a comfortable distance. The distance had closed.
She survived it.
Again. You stayed with her through it. That is not nothing. If you are not yet subscribed, subscribe now, because what is waiting for her in the next chapter is not a crisis she can fight her way through, and she is going to need someone in her corner who has been there from the beginning. Sleep became a formality around the 3rd hour, and before dawn she was dressed and moving. The estate corridors held their silence. Mapped in the first 2 days, not deliberately the way the order trained terrain into memory, but by walking them when the anxiety would not sit. The warped floor near the second landing. The windows left an inch open to the cold. A line of light under Aldous' office door for the 3rd consecutive night, and from inside the particular quiet sound of a page turning. Administrative work. Late hours. Men who managed kingdoms did not sleep conventional hours. 3 nights running. That was the problem with the story. She kept walking. The sunken garden sat at the estate's southern end, through a low gate that gave against her hand with the resistance of iron that had forgotten it was supposed to move. Found 4 days ago while looking for the outer wall and not finding it, and it had stopped her mid-step in a way she had not been able to explain and had not tried to. Not tended. Hedgerows gone leggy at the crown, stone paths with grass grown thick through the cracks, a bench at the far end that had lost its color to weather one season at a time over many years. Nothing arranged, nothing performing for anyone. That was what had stopped her. Standing in the gateway on that first morning, something in her chest had released one tight inch, and she had walked away before she could understand it. The next morning she came back. This morning she was at the bench in the pre-dawn dark, breath going white in the air, and the garden smelled of wet stone and something green alive underneath it. The Order's training yard had smelled like this before rain. Old stone, cold air, the particular quiet of a place that required nothing of you. That yard had been hers for 20 minutes each morning before the others arrived, and she had never told anyone what those 20 minutes were worth to her, because she had not known, until she no longer had them, what anything she quietly loved was worth. The compound had not been let in for 2 weeks. Let in now. I thought I was the only one who came here. One beat to suppress the reach and assess reflex. That adjustment, suppressing it, had kept her intact through 17 days in this court more than anything else. Farouk stood in the gateway with his hands loose at his sides and no weight of ceremony behind him. Something plain, no formal additions. He was looking at the garden rather than at her, with the expression of a man who had walked somewhere without deciding to. The bench offered the space beside her. He crossed the garden and sat. The silence between them he did not claim. She had noticed this about him, that he did not require rooms to orient around him, which was strange, because every room in this building had been doing exactly that his whole life. "How long has it been left like this?" she said. 9 years. He looked at the overgrown hedgerows. Give or take. The silence waited. He elaborated when he was ready and not before. She had learned this. What it meant that she had learned it was not examined. "Do you miss whoever kept it?" she said. A long pause. "The person I was when I thought things stayed," he said. "The garden is easier not to look at." That was understood precisely. Saying so required explaining why, and explaining why required more than she had any right to give anyone in this building.
She said it anyway.
"There was a yard," she said carefully. "At home. Nothing like this. Just a cleared space and 4 walls. Mine at a certain hour of the day, before anyone else arrived. A stop. I used to stand in it and exist without a function for a little while." He turned and looked at her. The sky above the hedgerows held her gaze. "Nadia told me she was raised on ceremony," he said quietly. Not an accusation. A piece of information placed between them to see what it would do. Her hands were still in her lap. Perhaps she left something out. He did not press it. The garden held them both. The sky moved, degree by degree, from dark to the flat white of approaching dawn. A bird started somewhere in the hedgerow. One note at intervals, no answer to it. The cold worked through her coat and into her back. Movement was the correct choice. 20 minutes had passed since movement should have happened. You asked me something no one has asked before, he said. What she had asked, without having planned to, the words arriving before the caution did, was whether he had chosen to stay, or whether staying had simply been what there was. I should not have, she said.
No.
A pause with weight in it. I was glad you did. Her hands stayed still in her lap. There was something she recognized in how he had answered. Not the answer itself. The quality of a person who had been asked a real question for the first time in longer than they could place, and had given a real answer, and was still sitting with what that cost. No, not by name, but by the specific sensation of a thing that had been waiting a long time to be used. Standing was the correct choice. The court would move within the hour. The time already spent here was a liability exceeded. She stayed. The sky continued its slow arrival. The birds stopped. The garden went quiet in a way that was different from the silence of the estate at night. Not absence. Something settled. You are not what I expected, he said.
Low.
Almost to himself. No answer existed that was safe. So silence came instead, and he accepted that too, with the patience of a man who had stopped expecting the people around him to fill every space he left open. When she finally stood, the cold had locked into her spine and was felt all the way up. The garden walked out of without rushing. At the gate, something in her chest moved the way a compass needle moves before it locks. Not settling, not certain, only indicating the direction of a pull she had not given permission for. The gate passed behind her, back inside, the gray morning at her back and the garden left there. The only thing that had changed was the time. She knew that was not true. Known clearly, and at a distance, she was no longer certain was wide enough. The distance maintained after the garden was deliberate, measured the way defensive positions are measured, not by feeling, by calculation. Far end of the formal table for meals. Conversation partners who occupied corners, whose attention did not drift toward the head of the room. Every gathering requiring her presence attended, with the press of bodies used as cover, a wall of voices and movement between herself and the man who had sat in the overgrown garden until the light changed and had not once asked her to account for herself. Keeping that distance was the most sustained effort made in 3 weeks in this building. It held for 5 days. The midnight patrol was the oldest custom in Blaviken's formal alliance protocol, found in the event schedule and read 3 times. The betrothed and the king walked the estate's outer boundary at midnight, accompanied by 2 members of the king's household. A single circuit. 40 minutes. Worse ground had been covered in worse conditions than a managed walk in the dark. What had not been accounted for was Aldous selecting the household members himself. The patrol began cleanly. The 4 of them moved through the estate's east gate in the order protocol specified, Farouk and Ilda, Aldous and a man named Carew, several paces behind. The boundary path ran between iron lanterns spaced at intervals, their light touching the ground in overlapping circles that left the spaces between them genuinely dark. Farouk's pace matched without the distance between them being allowed to close further than the walk required. At the path's north bend, Carew addressed Farouk about something administrative, drainage, a fence line. Farouk slowed to answer it. Her own pace held and moved ahead. Aldous was not heard coming. His hand closed around her forearm from behind with a grip that communicated exactly one thing. This is not a request. She stopped. He came around to face her. 3 feet of space. The lantern to her left, his face in the half-light carrying nothing readable and nothing usable. The expression of a man who had already done his accounting and was simply presenting the outcome. You are not the woman who arrived, he said. Quiet enough to stay inside the space between them. His gaze held. No speaking. The woman who arrived, he continued, would have had my arm for touching hers. You assessed the grip. You marked the lantern. You're tracking my hands. A fraction of a head tilt. Those are not the instincts of a woman raised at court. Carew's voice carried from 20 feet north. Farouk had not turned. 12 seconds. 15 at most. The best lie needed no construction. Not only at court, she said, and her voice came out level because it had to. My father served Wieland's outer garrisons for 30 years. 6 of them spent beside him. A girl learns to read hands before she learns to read rooms. His eyes held without difficulty because the effort was in everything else being kept still. You are mistaking a broader education for something worth acting on. Aldous looked at her for a moment that pressed down. The arm released. Perhaps. He did not step back. Exactly where he stood, he held, and the release was understood to be not a conclusion but a pause in the middle of a sentence, not yet finished. The path was rejoined before he could continue it. The perimeter wall ran along the estate's southern edge, old stone, waist height where the ground was flat, and taller where it dropped below. Nearly level with Farouk again when the route crossed the path without warning, no lantern close enough to have caught it, and her boot found it wrong. No fall. Her hand caught the top of the wall, and the stone edge opened the skin of her palm, and the momentum carried her another step before balance returned. Farouk was beside her before she registered. He had closed the distance. His hands came around her forearms, and the bare skin of his wrist met the bare skin of her hand where her glove had ridden back, and every wall built since the order took her at 14 went entirely, uselessly quiet. It came through the point of contact without asking. Not pain, not warmth. Something older than both, moving up her arm and into her chest, and settling there with a certainty that required no input from the part of her that knew how to be careful. Her blood recognized him. That was the only language for it. With the absolute, unargued finality of recognition that has been waiting a long time for its object. His pulse was felt through his hands, through his skin, the precise rhythm of his heart, and it matched the thing that had been stuttering in her chest since the garden, and the smell of him was rain and cold stone, and something dark underneath that had no name in any training she had been given, and the whole of it was stood inside, without stepping back. He went rigid. It moved through him, a current finding resistance, his jaw locking, his grip on her arms going briefly, involuntarily tight, and then with the precise control of a man overriding something much stronger than the override, he let go. One step back. Careful. Neither of them spoke. The wall. The dark beyond it. Caru's voice, distant and administrative, still carrying from the north end of the path. Your scent, Farouk said. Very quiet. It is different than I remembered. The first thing that would close the space without requiring the true thing behind it. A preparation from home. My sister sent it north. The words arrived before they were chosen, and that was its own kind of information about what the last 30 seconds had done. He looked at her for a long moment, reading past the surface of what had been offered. I do not believe you, he said. Not angry. Not accusing. The way a person names something they have just finished confirming, a fact set down carefully, that has not yet been decided what to build from. His gaze held. Nothing more offered, because there was nothing more that was safe, and because the bond was pressing against the inside of her chest with an insistence that had nothing passive in it. A live thing, fully awake, with no interest in her discipline or her strategies or the careful distance 5 days had been spent constructing. The order had built walls in her, maintained through things that would have broken most people. None of them had been built for this. 20 feet north, Aldous had stopped walking. He was looking at her. He had not looked at Farouk once. The days after the midnight patrol were a study in deliberate smallness. Meals at different hours. The reading room over the library, the east corridor over the west, the chair nearest the door, in every room entered. Motion as camouflage. Routine refused as a gift to anyone, including herself. The bond did not quiet. An expectation had formed that it would, that the urgency of it would subside the way physical responses to threat subsided once the threat resolved. 3 days.
4.
It stayed exactly where it had arrived, in the center of her chest, pressing with the persistence of something that has found its home and has no interest in her objections. The archive was not on her usual circuit. Found in the first week while mapping the upper corridor and noted without entering, a door at the administrative wing's end, unlocked, the kind of room no one prevents access to because no one thinks to mention it. Starting on the 10th day, after the 10th bell, when the corridor emptied. The books were Blaviken's formal records, estate history, alliance documentation, nothing needed for reading but everything needed for looking occupied by, and the room itself was cold enough to keep her awake and quiet enough to let her think. The door opened on the 4th night. No surprise crossed his face. That was the first thing registered. He had come looking. Understood in the time it took him to cross the room without announcing himself, lift the decanter from the reading table, and pour 2 glasses with the ease of a man who had done exactly this in other rooms and other hours. 1 glass set in front of her. A chair taken across the table. The silence left alone. The archive smelled of old vellum and the particular damp that lived in walls this thick. The candle between them was the room's only light, and it threw his face half into shadow. The glass went up. They talked without moving toward anything urgent. He asked what she was reading and she told him, and he took the record from her hand and identified the dispute it referenced from memory, years and names, and the specific clause that had resolved it, and she watched him do it the way she watched any person handle something they were genuinely good at, with the attention it deserved. "You carry this alone," she said. He turned the record in his hands. "The council advises. The decisions stay with me." "That's not the same thing." He looked at her.
"No,
it's not." The stillness between them had the quality she had only encountered in the garden. Not the performed quiet of 2 people being careful. A shared recognition that neither of them required the other to be smaller. Not had this in 15 years. Not known until this moment, in this cold room, with the candle burning low between them, what the absence had cost. More came out than intended. She spoke of the compound the way she had described it to no one since leaving, the sound of the training yard before dawn, the specific weight of carrying a responsibility not chosen and not refusable, the way a person marks time differently when every day's shape is identical and the years only become real in retrospect. Her hands stayed flat on the table. Looking away was not done. He listened the way he did everything.
Completely.
"The bells at the compound," she said. "Every 4 hours. You learn to feel the schedule in your body before you hear it." The word left her mouth. The sharpness moved through his face without telegraphing itself, a subtle reclassification, a mind encountering a piece that does not fit the shape already built. It was watched, and her own face kept still while her mind ran through the distance between her and the door and found it irrelevant. "Nadia was raised in Wieland's court," he said. "Quiet. Precise. Not a compound. 1 second.
2.
"The language stays," she said. "Whatever place forms you. Time at my father's garrison before court had me. Some of what I learned there is still how I describe things." The smallest curve allowed at her mouth. "You're right to notice. Most people don't." He held the look, measuring it against what he already knew. Then, slowly, the sharpness settled back. Not convinced. Not pressing. The expression of a man who has filed the discrepancy and is choosing his moment. The lie had worked. That was the thing that was hated. Because what she told him was true, not in its attribution, not in the history implied, but in every sensation that had been meant. He had received the truest account of her given to anyone in this building, and it had landed in the wrong name. He stood. He came around the table. The backs of his fingers touched her jaw, along the line of it, light enough to carry uncertainty, not possession but the touch of a man not entirely sure the thing in front of him is real, checking at the closest point available. Her teeth stayed closed. Every word she had, the order, Nadia at the door, the gate she had been holding open since the day she arrived, pressed to the back of her mouth and went no further. Not her name. That was the weight of it. Every true thing offered in 4 weeks of this building, every piece of herself that had slipped past her discipline, every moment he had reached toward her and found her, all of it received under her sister's name. Herself handed over in the wrong currency, and him holding it without knowing what it was. He wished her good night. She watched him go. The letter was in the corridor slot when she returned. The seal recognized before it was touched. Read quickly. Wall looked at. Read again slower. Nadia was asking for the security rotations. The watch hours on the estate's east axis. The guard patterns on the outer boundary. The same boundary walked in the dark 4 nights ago with Farouk's hand steadying her arm. Very still, with the page open in front of her, not moving. There was only one use for this information. Not documentation. Not the architecture of peace between 2 kingdoms. The watch hours on the east axis were for one purpose, and it was not the purpose Nadia had named when she pressed a traveling cloak into Ilda's arms and spoke of truce. The shape of it arrived all at once, the way you understand you have been standing in a room for a long time without knowing what the room was for. Nadia had not come to Blaviken to hold a peace. She had come to map, where the wall was thin enough to break. And Ilda had been standing at the gate, still sitting with the letter, when the door opened. Farouk's approach through the corridor had not been heard. Her own face had not been registered until he crossed the room and his expression changed, a subtle tightening, the response of a man encountering something unexpected in a place he thought he understood. "You've been crying," he said.
Not known until then.
One hand lifted to her cheek and found it wet, and the loss of control so complete that it had not been noticed was its own kind of reckoning. Her face went into both his hands, the way someone does when they want to look at something directly and not let it move away. The bond came alive between his palms and her skin, not the sudden fire of the boundary wall, but a low, sustained pressure, a current running the full length of the thing that had been building since the garden, since the blood tasting, since the morning she had looked at him in the half-dark and recognized something she had no assignment for. She rose onto her toes and kissed him. He made a low sound, surprise and surrender, both at once. And then his arms came around her and he kissed her the way a man kisses when he has stopped arguing with himself about it, without the management she had watched him apply to everything else in this building. The bond sealed between them, fully and finally, snapping into place with the authority of something that had been waiting a long time to be acknowledged. Known even inside it exactly what she was doing. Kissing him goodbye. She kissed him anyway. The cathedral occupied a full block of Lincoln's older quarter. Standing at its altar now, with the court assembled and Nadia's veil over her face and the bond sealed and burning in her chest, the room meant something it had not meant before. The doors opened at the nave's far end. Nadia walked the length of it in traveling clothes, chin level, eyes already moving across the space with the trained assessment of a woman who entered every room looking for the shape of it. The same face, the same dark hair, the same exact quality of held composure that Ilda had been performing for 31 days. One collective breath moved through the court. Farouk lifted the veil. His eyes moved between them, one to the other, back again, and she watched his mind assemble what it had half-built and not let itself finish. Aldous leaned in. One sentence. Farouk's gaze dropped to her collarbone, the scar low on the left side where a training blade had caught her at 17. Nadia had never had it. The final piece, confirming what he had already almost known. The court emptied before he said a word. 3 of them remained in the nave. Nadia was not waited on to be asked. "My name is Ilda," she said. "Nadia is my twin. She arrived at the compound bleeding and told me the truce would break if Blaviken's betrothed disappeared. That was not the full account." Her voice stayed even. He was owed evenness. "She came to map your walls. Security rotations, entry points, the east access watch hours, for Wieland's council, not for peace." The gate was held open. Without knowing it, and then knowing it, and not yet knowing what to do. Nadia stepped forward. "Your quarrel is with me."
No.
No turned toward her. For the first time in 31 days, her sister was not let in front of her. "This is mine. One more thing." "One." "The woman you came to know in this building, in the garden, in the archive, who almost told you the truth twice, that was not a performance. That was the only woman she has ever been." That is real. Whatever you decide to do with the rest of it. Farouk was very still. Get out of my sight, he said. His voice did not rise. The bond pulled taut as she walked the full length of the emptied nave, and from across the room, she felt his hand press against his own chest, to the place where the bond sat. Felt it through the sealed thing between them, through the doors, and no looking back. Half a day south of Lincoln, the road ran flat and pale through open country.
She stopped.
The reins went slack, and the horizon of the version of herself that led back to was looked at. Nadia's saddlebag opened without asking. What was there came out. Nadia drew up beside her, did not reach for it. Her horse turned north. On his desk it was laid, without asking for a hearing. Every rotation, every watch hour, every weakness mapped across 6 weeks. He was told what it was, told what it would allow him to do. Then one thing was asked, a posting in the League of Shadows. Not proximity, not a title, not anything that required him to look at her if he had decided not to. Only his walls instead of her own, and a function she already knew how to perform. Forgiveness was not asked for. Enough of herself remained not to ask for what had not yet been earned. He looked at the desk for a long time. Yes, he said. The first frost came to Lincoln's Plains in late October. Nothing was said the first time he stood at the edge of the League's training ground and watched her work. He left. He came back. Registered each time. Attention kept on the task in front of her, because everything had been given him, and asking for more would have been its own kind of dishonesty. The third time, he crossed the ground between them. She went still before he reached her. His hand lifted to the scar on her left collarbone, the mark that had told her from her sister, the one thing no borrowed name had ever covered, and held it there a moment, warm against the cold air. Certain the way only a choice made after long cost is certain. Ilda, he said. Her own name. Not her name. Hers. The bond settled in her chest the way something heavy settles when it finds the ground built to hold it, fully and without argument, and she let it, because she was done carrying things at a distance from the places they belonged. The Order's instrument. Her sister's shield. Every assignment in between. The truth handed to him at the cost of everything, and the cost waited inside with no certainty of return. This was what it returned. Standing in the cold with his hand at her collarbone and her own name still in the air between them, for the first time in her life, no function was being performed. No role filled. No line held for someone else's sake. Only herself. That, it turned out, was more than enough. Not every woman who walked into this city carrying someone else's name got this ending. Some of them are still out there on the road, riding in the dark with a borrowed life and no map for what comes after. If this story reached you, subscribe. The others are still coming. They will meet someone who stayed. Lincoln does not talk about its older half. The houses near the river know better, and the women who live close enough to them have learned to as well. There are others in this city who have stood at the edge of something they were trained to refuse. Some of them found their way back. Some of them are still riding north at dusk with something heavy in their saddlebag and no certainty of what waits at the other end. They will find their stories when they are ready. Every one of those stories is already underway.